The sun dipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows over the old, weathered farmhouse. The smell of dust and age filled the air as retired Army Sergeant James Jim Harper sat in his rocking chair, staring at the faded photograph in his hand. It was a photo he thought he'd forgotten, buried deep within the back of his mind for years, but now it seemed to be pulling him back into the past. This wasn't just any photo. It was a grainy image taken in the desert, 1947, Roswell. Jim had never talked much about his time there. He never felt the need. Not until now. Roswell, he muttered to himself, the name tasting bitter on his tongue. The crash, the cover-up, the alien bodies, or was it all just some elaborate lie? A faint knock at the door broke his train of thought. Jim didn't move, though. It wasn't his neighbor, and it wasn't a delivery. He hadn't had many visitors since he retired, and the ones who did show up were rarely friendly. He reached for the photograph again, his fingers grazing the creases. The picture was old, but he remembered what it represented. The day the truth began to unravel, the knock came again. This time, louder, more insistent. Jim's hand tightened around the picture. Without thinking, he stood up, the floorboards creaking under his weight. Slowly, he moved toward the door, each step heavier than the last. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew one thing for certain. Something had changed. Something was coming back. As he opened the door, he found a man standing on the other side, tall, wearing a dark jacket and sunglasses that hid his eyes. The man didn't smile. He didn't need to. "Sergeant Harper?" the man asked, his voice low and measured. Jim gripped the door frame tighter. "Who wants to know?" The stranger stepped forward, his shoes scraping against the dirt driveway. "We need to talk about Roswell." For a moment, Jim froze. His heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the weight of the past pressing in on him, the ghosts of long-buried secrets stirring awake. He wasn't sure how the man knew about Roswell, but there was no mistaking the intensity in his voice. "I thought that was all over," Jim said, his voice rough. "The government swept it under the rug. We were told to forget." The man took off his sunglasses, revealing cold, calculating eyes. "We're not asking any more. You've been keeping something for too long." Jim's grip tightened on the door, his knuckles turning white. "What are you talking about?" "The evidence, Sergeant. You've seen it. You know what happened that night. And you know it's not what they've told the world." Jim felt a shiver run down his spine. His mind raced back to that moment in 1947. The strange lights, the wreckage, the bodies. It had been more than just a military operation. He had known it then, but now it was all coming back in vivid flashes. A low hum seemed to fill the air, and Jim realized with a sickening feeling that this wasn't just about the past anymore. Someone or something was watching him. He took a step back, closing the door halfway. "I don't know what you're talking about." The man didn't flinch. "You can lie all you want, but the truth is catching up with you, Sergeant. And it's going to catch up with all of us." The door clicked shut, and the man was gone before Jim could react. But as Jim stood there, staring at the door, the faint sound of something strange hummed through the walls. Something that wasn't there before. He turned slowly, the photograph still in his hand. His mind was racing. He had to know more. He had to uncover the truth about Roswell. The world had believed the crash was just a weather balloon. But what if it wasn't? What if there was more to the story? What if they hadn't been told everything? In that moment, Jim Harper knew one thing. He couldn't ignore it anymore. He had to dig deeper, even if it meant facing the danger that had haunted him all those years. What was the government hiding? What really happened on that fateful night in 1947? And what did this stranger know about it? One thing was certain. The truth was far more dangerous than he could ever have imagined. As he stared out the window, his fingers trembling, He knew his journey into the unknown had only just begun. But would he survive it? The rain began to fall in steady sheets, tapping against the window in a rhythm that matched the pounding of Jim Harper's heart. It was late now, and the quiet of the farmhouse was almost suffocating. He sat at his kitchen table, the dim light from a single bulb casting long shadows over the room. The photograph was still there, lying in front of him. But this time, it wasn't the only thing on the table. Scattered around the photo were maps, detailed maps of the Roswell area. Jim had dug them out of his old military files. He hadn't looked at them in years, but something about them now felt urgent. Something about the way the lines and coordinates were drawn seemed to trigger memories he had long buried. His fingers hovered over the map, tracing the lines that crisscrossed the desert, leading to a place he'd been too afraid to revisit, the crash site. Jim's mind raced as he replayed the conversation with the stranger. Earlier that evening, the man had mentioned evidence and had been so certain Jim had seen something that could shake the very foundations of everything the world thought they knew about Roswell. But what? A knock on the door jolted him from his thoughts, sharp and quick. Jim's pulse spiked. He wasn't expecting anyone. Not now, not tonight. With a careful, deliberate movement, he grabbed the pistol tucked into his waistband and stood up. He made his way silently to the door, every step feeling like an eternity. The rain had drowned out most of the outside noise, but there it was again, an eerie hum, like the one he had heard earlier. Another knock, louder this time. "Jim Harper?" A voice called through the door, muffled by the wood. Jim paused, his breath catching in his throat. It was the same voice from earlier, the stranger. "Go away," Jim called, trying to keep the tremor out of his voice. He was done with this. He didn't want to get involved. Not again. The hum outside intensified, vibrating through the door now. There was something wrong about it. Something unsettling. "I'm not here to hurt you," the voice replied. "I'm here to help. You have to listen." Jim's grip tightened on the doorknob. Was this a trap, or was it something else? But before he could decide, the doorbell rang. This time, from the back of the house. He froze. No one had ever used the back entrance. With the pistol raised, Jim moved toward the back door. His footsteps were nearly silent against the wet floorboards. The air felt thick, charged with tension. He peered through the small window by the door, but there was nothing there. Just the rain, tapping against the glass. But something wasn't right. The hum had grown louder, faint yet unmistakable. It wasn't just a sound anymore, it was a presence. Jim cautiously opened the back door. His eyes scanned the yard, but there was nothing. Nothing except for a small, rectangular object glinting in the corner of the porch. It was a black case, worn and scratched from years of neglect. Instinctively, Jim crouched down and reached for it. As his fingers made contact with the cold metal, a surge of electricity jolted through him. His vision blurred for a second. His body locked in place. But the case felt familiar. The humming sensation in the air suddenly stopped. The silence was deafening. He stood there, holding the case, his heart pounding. Had he just made a mistake? With trembling hands, he lifted the latch on the case. Inside, nestled within a bed of foam, was a small object. A disc-shaped device, covered in strange symbols that Jim couldn't recognize. The moment he touched it, an overwhelming wave of memories flooded his mind. The crash site, the military officers in hazmat suits, the bodies, small, gray, lifeless, the feeling of the unknown pressing in from all sides, and then a voice, a whisper, so faint it was barely audible, came to him. "You know what happened, Jim. You can't hide from it anymore." Jim snapped the case shut, his breath coming in shallow gasps. What had just happened? Was this some sort of mind game? Was it possible that the military had planted this here to test him? To see how far he would go? But then something caught his eye. A small piece of paper had fallen out from under the foam lining. He unfolded it, his fingers numb. The note was typed. No handwriting, just a simple message. "We've been watching you. Don't trust them. They know what you saw." His heart stopped. The hum returned. The voice whispered again, louder this time. "It's time." Jim slammed the back door shut and leaned against it, shaking. He had been avoiding the truth for so long, but now it was undeniable. The evidence was right in front of him. Something had happened that night in 1947, something he'd seen with his own eyes. But he wasn't prepared for this, for the deeper conspiracy that was now threatening to engulf him. The government had lied, but there was more, something bigger. Something no one had dared to speak about. And now, someone, or something, was pulling him back into the darkness. What had he stumbled onto? Was it really alien technology? Or was he being set up to unravel a far greater mystery than he could even imagine? All he knew was that the world wouldn't be the same once he uncovered the truth. But would he make it out alive to tell it? The wind howled through the cracks of the farmhouse, a constant, eerie reminder that the world outside was shifting. Jim Harper sat in his study, the rain still pouring heavily outside, but his mind was elsewhere, caught in the whirlwind of what had just happened. His hands trembled as he examined the strange device and the note again, both as baffling and terrifying as ever. The symbols etched into the disc weren't from any language he knew. And the note, "We've been watching you. Don't trust them. They know what you saw," lingered in his mind like an unsettling echo. What was he missing? He ran his fingers over the worn map spread out on the table. He'd been up for hours now, tracing routes and locations, trying to make sense of the mess of clues. Every road, every crossroad, every desert stretch of land. There was a pattern. One that was far too deliberate to be a coincidence. Jim paused, staring at a particular spot marked on the map. His breath caught in his throat. It was a series of coordinates near the Roswell Crash site. The military had claimed the area was cleaned up and secured within hours of the crash, but Jim knew better. He'd been there. He remembered the secrets buried beneath layers of dirt and government lies. But this new pattern was something different. Something that didn't match any of the official stories. The symbols on the disc, the cryptic messages, the coordinates. Suddenly it hit him. It wasn't just the crash site that had been compromised all those years ago. The government had known there was something bigger at play here. Something more than just one alien ship. They had hidden something significant. But why? Why the secrecy? His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door, soft, deliberate. Jim stood frozen, his hand gripping the edge of the table. The stranger, the man who had appeared at his doorstep the night before, was back. He hesitated for a moment. This wasn't just a coincidence anymore. The universe seemed to be conspiring to draw him back into the dark web of conspiracy and lies. Another knock, more urgent this time. Jim's hand reached for the pistol again, but then something made him pause. Was it fear, or was it something else? Maybe he was ready for the truth. No more running. Slowly he approached the door. This time he didn't hesitate to open it. The stranger stood there again, looking as composed as ever. But there was something different in his eyes. A flicker of urgency, of recognition, as if he knew Jim had already uncovered more than he should have. "Sergeant Harper," the man said quietly, "we need to talk." Jim didn't reply right away. His mind was buzzing with 1,000 questions, and his heart was pounding. He could feel the walls closing in. Was this just another layer of the game? Another move in a game of cat and mouse? "I don't have time for games," Jim muttered. "What do you want?" The stranger's gaze hardened. He stepped inside without waiting for permission, his dark coat brushing against the door frame. "You're digging too deep," he said. "You need to stop." Jim's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" "I don't know who you are or why you're here, but I'm done being kept in the dark." The man studied him for a moment, then nodded, as if he had expected this. I came to warn you. The pattern you're seeing, it's not just coincidence. They know you're onto something. Who's they? Jim asked, his voice low but charged with a rising sense of dread. The stranger lowered his voice to a whisper, eyes darting around the room as if making sure no one was listening. The government! And something far worse than them. Jim felt the chill of the room creep up his spine. What are you talking about? Who are you? I'm someone who's been trying to put the pieces together just like you, the man said. But I have access to information you don't. And right now, we're running out of time. Before Jim could respond, the stranger pulled out a small device, no larger than a pack of cigarettes. It was covered in strange markings that mirrored the symbols on the disc he had found. This, the man continued, is a transmitter. Not just any kind. It's linked to something bigger. It's been hidden, covered up, for decades. The Roswell crash wasn't an isolated incident. It was the beginning of something that's been building ever since. Jim stared at the device, his mind racing. What does it do? Not what you think, the stranger said with a dark smile. It sends signals. Signals that they don't want anyone to hear. Signals to a place you're not supposed to know about. Jim felt a knot form in his stomach. What place? The stranger leaned in, his breath cold against Jim's ear. A base. Deep underground. The real site of the Roswell crash. Not the one they told you about. The one that's still active. And they've been experimenting on what they found. Alien technology. And worse, alien life. Jim recoiled slightly. You're saying there are more? More ships? More aliens? The man nodded, his expression grave. Yes, and they've been watching you. They know you're close to the truth. The patterns, the coordinates, everything you're seeing connects to that base. Jim felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside. So why don't they just stop me? Because they can't. Not yet. Jim's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? The stranger paused, his lips pressing into a thin line. You're not just uncovering the past, Sergeant. You're revealing something that's alive. Something still out there. The crash wasn't the end, it was just the beginning of an experiment. One that they've kept hidden. And now it's starting to wake up. The hum returned, faint but undeniable. The sensation in the air grew heavier, more oppressive. Jim's heart raced, the weight of everything crashing down on him at once. It wasn't just about aliens anymore. It wasn't even just about a government cover-up. This was something bigger, something far more dangerous. And now he was in too deep to back out. The man's words lingered in the air, the final nail in the coffin. Whatever you think you know, it's far worse than you can imagine. The storm had passed by morning, but the air still felt heavy, thick with the promise of something unknown. Jim Harper couldn't shake the chill that had settled into his bones after the stranger's warning. It's alive. It's waking up. The words repeated in his mind, gnawing at him like an insistent whisper in the dark. What had he uncovered? What was so dangerous that it couldn't be allowed to come to light? And why had the government been so hell-bent on burying it for all these years? He sat at his kitchen table, staring at the strange device the man had given him, the one covered in symbols that seemed to pulse with an energy all their own. He had tried, unsuccessfully, to analyze it, but the markings weren't any language he recognized, and the hum that had come from it, no, not just from the device, but from the air itself, still echoed in his mind. Jim's fingers trembled as he reached for the transmitter, a subtle weight pulling him toward it. Could it really be connected to the Roswell crash? Was it linked to the alien technology the government had hidden all these years? A sudden knock at the door broke his concentration. Jim stiffened. His heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected anyone, not today, not after what had happened last night. The stranger had warned him they were watching him, and if they knew he was on to something, there was no telling what would happen next. He moved cautiously toward the door, his mind racing. He had to be careful. Whatever was coming wasn't ordinary. This wasn't just some conspiracy he could walk away from. The knock came again, louder this time. Jim's fingers grazed the handle, but he hesitated. The last time he opened the door, he had barely escaped with his life. Who could be on the other side now? He glanced at the clock. Mid-morning. Too early for neighbors, and too late for anyone from the government to be playing games. He opened the door, his pistol hidden in the small of his back. But as the door swung open, he froze. Standing there wasn't a man in a suit. It wasn't a government agent or some shadowy figure from his past. It was someone he never expected. A woman. She was tall, her hair dark and pulled back into a tight ponytail. She wore a jacket that looked almost military, but her demeanor was far from official. There was an urgency in her eyes, an intensity that Jim couldn't ignore. "Sergeant Harper," she said, her voice clipped but firm. We need to talk. Now." Jim's stomach clenched. "Who the hell are you?" She didn't flinch at his tone. In fact, she stepped forward, her eyes scanning the interior of the house quickly, as if checking for something, or someone, hidden in the shadows. "Listen to me," she said in a low voice. "You're in danger. You have no idea how deep this goes, but I can help you, if you're willing to listen." Jim stepped back, his hand instinctively moving to his sidearm. "I'm listening. But if you're here to play games, you can turn around and walk right back out." She didn't seem intimidated. "You've already seen too much. You've uncovered something, and that something is going to get you killed if you don't stop." "Stop what?" Jim growled. "Stop searching for the truth?" She gave him a look that was almost pitying. "No, Sergeant. Stop thinking that you can just stumble into this and come out clean. There's more at stake here than just Roswell. More than you can imagine. You're standing on the edge of a precipice, and if you take one more step, you won't come back." Jim's mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle fitting together at a terrifying speed. "You know about Roswell? You know what's going on?" The woman nodded slowly. "I do. And I know what you're dealing with." She pulled something from inside her jacket. Another black case, similar to the one Jim had found on his porch the night before. "This is what they don't want you to have," she said, her voice lower now, as if afraid someone might hear. "This is the kind of evidence they'll kill for." Jim's pulse quickened. Another case? His hand reached instinctively toward it, but she held it just out of reach. "Not yet," she said, her eyes locking with his. "You need to understand what's at stake. That transmitter you have, it's a beacon. They've been using it for years to track alien technology. It's not just alien artifacts they've been hiding. It's alien communication." Jim's chest tightened. Alien communication. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. "You're telling me this thing is talking to something out there?" Jim asked, incredulous. The woman's eyes darkened. "Yes, but it's not just any alien you're dealing with. These creatures, they've been monitoring us, not just from the crash in 1947, from before. And they're waking up." Jim's head spun. "Waking up? What do you mean? You're saying there's more? More aliens?" She nodded, her jaw set in grim determination. "More, and they're not friendly." Jim stared at her, trying to process it all. It was too much. His mind couldn't keep up with the chaos unraveling before him. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" he demanded. She hesitated, her gaze flicking around nervously. "Because they know you're close to the truth. And now they're coming for you. They won't stop until you're silenced." Jim's blood ran cold. The walls of his house, which had felt like a safe haven only hours ago, suddenly felt too thin, too fragile. He could almost hear them outside. Them, the people, the entities, who wanted to stop him from uncovering the truth. "We don't have time," the woman urged. "You need to leave, now, before they find you." As if on cue, a sound cut through the stillness. A distant hum, faint but growing louder. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a plane. It was something else. Jim felt his heart drop into his stomach. They were here. The woman grabbed his arm, urgency now thick in her voice. "This is your warning, Sergeant. You need to move, fast, before it's too late." The hum outside was growing louder, reverberating through the walls of Jim's house like a terrible, foreboding drumbeat. His pulse pounded in his ears, each beat matching the rhythmic thrum of the mysterious sound. The woman, her grip tight on his arm, yanked him toward the back door. "Now, Sergeant, we don't have time," she hissed. Jim's mind raced. Who were these people? What did they know? And why had they waited until now to approach him when he was already so deep into something he couldn't possibly understand? The device, the transmitter, the strange, unexplainable symbols, and the ominous warning. They know what you saw. He couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that everything he thought he knew about Roswell and about his own life was a lie. The woman was pulling him outside now, her pace frantic. As Jim stepped into the rain-soaked yard, his eyes scanned the sky, searching for the source of that eerie hum. The air felt different now, charged, almost electric, and then he saw it. A dark shape in the sky, moving far too fast for a plane, its outline obscured by the gray clouds. His breath caught in his throat. It was real. It was happening, right now. "Get in the truck," the woman barked, shoving him toward a rusted pickup parked by the fence. She didn't look back. She was already halfway to the driver's side, and Jim had no choice but to follow. They drove in silence, the hum still vibrating in the air, growing more insistent as the minutes ticked by. Jim's eyes darted nervously to the rearview mirror. Had they been followed? He didn't know who they were, but every instinct told him that they were coming. Fast. "Who are you?" Jim finally asked, his voice low but sharp, with the fear and frustration he couldn't hide. "What's going on? You've been dropping hints, but you're not telling me anything." The woman's jaw tightened. "I'm someone who's trying to keep you alive long enough to get you to the truth. You're not the only one who's been digging into this, Sergeant. There's a network of us. We've been watching the signals, piecing things together. But the people you think are your allies, they're not. They've been lying to you. And they've been lying to everyone." Jim's mind spun. Lying to everyone? Who? The government? The military? What was all of this? And why had they let him, a retired soldier, get so close to the answers? "Then why don't you just tell me everything?" Jim demanded. "I've had enough of these cryptic messages and half answers." She glanced at him briefly, her eyes dark with something like regret, or maybe fear. "Because if I told you everything, Sergeant, you wouldn't believe me. You wouldn't believe what we've uncovered. You wouldn't believe what we're up against." Jim clenched his fists. "Try me." She seemed to hesitate, but only for a moment. "All right, fine. The Roswell crash wasn't the first time they came here. And it wasn't the only ship that landed. We've been able to track them, these things, ever since. But it's not just about alien technology. It's about what they've left behind, what they've been hiding for decades." Jim's breath caught in his chest. "What are you talking about? What have they been hiding?" She turned the wheel sharply, steering them off the main road, taking a series of turns that led them further out into the wilderness. There was nothing out here, no towns, no signs of life. Just miles of empty desert stretching in all directions. "We're heading to a place," she said, her voice low, "where the truth is buried, where the real crash site is. Not the one they show the public, not the one in the official records. the place where the technology and the beings were hidden. Jim's heart raced. Was this it? The thing he'd been looking for all these years? The place that had haunted his dreams since the first whispers of the Roswell crash reached his ears? He didn't know what he was expecting. But when they pulled up to the nondescript warehouse at the edge of a barren field, he knew this was it. This was where the secrets had been buried. The woman slammed the truck into park and jumped out. Before Jim could say anything, "Stay close," she said, her voice sharp with urgency. "We don't know how much time we have." As they made their way toward the warehouse, Jim's senses were on high alert. He had been trained for moments like this. The quiet before the storm, the creeping dread that something wasn't quite right. The door to the warehouse creaked open with an unsettling groan. Inside, it was dark, save for a few dim lights that flickered overhead. The woman moved quickly, without hesitation, as if she'd been here before. "This way," she called, leading him down a narrow hallway. The walls seemed to close in around them, the temperature dropping with each step they took. Jim's breath fogged in the air. They reached a steel door at the end of the hall. She paused, her hand on the handle. "Whatever you see in here, Sergeant, it's not what you think." Before Jim could ask what she meant, the door swung open, revealing a vast underground facility, far larger than anything he had expected. And there, in the center of the room, surrounded by glass cases and industrial equipment, was a table. And on that table were remains. Not just any remains, though. Not human. Jim's breath caught as his eyes locked onto the small gray body lying under the bright fluorescent lights. It was unmistakable. The creature that had been rumored to have died at Roswell, it was real. But there was more. Beside the body resting in a containment unit was a second object. A device. Sleek and metallic. Humming. With an energy Jim could feel deep in his chest. "Is that—" Jim whispered, unable to finish the thought. The woman nodded, her voice hoarse. "Yes, that's the transmitter you've been carrying. It's not just an artifact. It's a key to what they're trying to unlock. And it's been dormant for decades. But now?" Her voice trailed off, and her eyes flicked nervously to the shadows. "Now what?" Jim demanded. "Now. It's waking up." Suddenly the hum in the air intensified, vibrating through Jim's bones. It wasn't just the transmitter anymore. Something else, something alive, was starting to stir, and Jim knew, without a doubt, that he was in way over his head. The hum was deafening now, vibrating through Jim's very soul. It was as though the entire underground facility had come alive, resonating with an energy far beyond anything he had ever experienced. His body felt heavy, as if the air itself had become denser, more oppressive. The transmitter, the alien body, and that device, the one he'd been carrying for days, they were all connected. Jim's heart raced, a primal fear setting in. The woman, whoever she was, had been right. He was standing on the edge of a precipice, and if he stepped any closer, there would be no going back. But what was that feeling? That strange pull toward the object on the table? It was like a magnetic force, something almost too familiar, urging him forward. "We need to get out of here," the woman said, her voice sharp, more urgent than before. She grabbed Jim's arm, pulling him back toward the door. Now. But Jim couldn't move. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the body on the table, or from the glowing device resting beside it. There was something in the air, something in his bones, that told him this was it. This was what he had been searching for his entire life. "No," he said, his voice firm. "Not yet. I need to understand." The woman's face hardened. She grabbed his shoulder and spun him around to face her. "Listen to me, Sergeant. You don't know what you're dealing with. These aren't just alien artifacts. They're not just remnants of a crash. These things, these creatures, they're alive. And if we don't stop this now, they will wake up. They've been dormant for decades, but something's triggered them. Something in that transmitter. Jim's gaze darted between the glowing device and the body on the table. It was as if a piece of him was pulling toward them, compelled, almost hypnotized. I don't care what happens, Jim said, his voice low and determined. I need answers, now. She stared at him for a moment, eyes narrowing with both fear and pity. You're making a mistake, but you won't believe me until it's too late. She grabbed the transmitter from Jim's bag, turning it over in her hands. This isn't just a communication device, it's a signal. A call. A call for what? Jim asked, his throat dry. The woman paused, her lips pressing into a thin line as if weighing her words. A call to them, the ones that aren't dead, the ones that have been waiting. And now that they've heard the signal, they're coming. Jim's blood ran cold. You're telling me this is a beacon? A way to bring them here? To Earth? She nodded slowly, her expression grim. Yes, the beings that crashed at Roswell weren't the only ones. They were part of a much larger operation, a vast network of alien species, all connected through this technology. And they've been waiting for the signal to activate. The sound of boots echoing in the distance broke the momentary silence between them. The woman's eyes widened in panic. We don't have much time. They're already here. They've already started the process. Jim's heart began to race. They? Who? Who was coming? We need to leave, she urged, her voice tight. Now! But before they could move, the entire room began to shake. The walls groaned in protest, the lights flickering overhead as the hum in the air grew louder, closer. The ground beneath their feet vibrated, like a storm was gathering right beneath them. Then it happened. A low, guttural growl echoed from the far side of the room, and Jim's blood turned to ice. It wasn't a human sound. It wasn't even close to anything he'd ever heard before. The sound was primal, alien, and it was getting closer. What the hell is that? Jim hissed, his eyes darting around in a panic. The woman's face was pale now, her eyes wide with terror. They're waking up. They've been dormant for so long, but now they're coming for us. Jim spun toward the sound, every instinct screaming at him to run, but his legs wouldn't move. He couldn't move. From the shadows, something shifted. A figure, tall and grotesque, emerged from the darkness. It was unlike anything Jim had ever seen. A nightmarish silhouette, with limbs too long and a body too thin. Its skin was a deep grayish blue, slick and smooth like rubber. Its face almost featureless, except for two large black eyes that glowed with an unsettling light. And behind it, emerging in waves, were more. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist as more figures slithered into view, their shapes impossibly alien, their movements jerky and unnatural. The woman stumbled back, her face paling. They've been here the whole time, she whispered, and now they've finally woken up. Jim's heart was pounding in his chest. His legs felt like lead, but he forced himself to turn toward the door. The woman grabbed his arm. No, we can't go back out there. Not now. Then what the hell do we do? Jim spat, his breath shallow with panic. Before she could answer, the door to the warehouse slammed open with a force that shook the entire building. The sound of boots, of yelling, of military radios crackling through the chaos. They had found them. The woman cursed under her breath. It's too late. The military's here and they're not coming to help us. Jim spun back toward the figures that had begun moving in their direction. His instinct screamed at him to fight, run, do anything. But he didn't know what these creatures were or what they wanted, and in that moment, he realized that whatever he had uncovered wasn't just a simple military cover-up. This was bigger. This was beyond anything he could have imagined. The woman grabbed his arm, her eyes locked on the door. We need to get out. Now! Jim glanced at the creature closing in on them, its massive eyes glowing brighter by the second. Then, without thinking, he turned and ran, following her out of the warehouse and into the night. But as they burst into the open air, Jim couldn't shake the thought. They've been waiting for this, and now that the signal had been activated, the real battle for Earth was about to begin. The cold night air hit Jim's face like a slap, but it wasn't enough to snap him out of the haze of terror and confusion. They were running, again. The woman, whose name he still didn't know, was leading him, pushing him forward through the darkness, her eyes wild with fear. Behind them, the warehouse loomed like a shadowy prison, the sound of boots thundering toward them, getting closer. With each passing second, the aliens, the figures inside, the creatures that had emerged from the shadows, they were real. It wasn't just some government cover-up or paranoid fantasy. Whatever was happening here, whatever had been set into motion by the mysterious transmitter, was far worse than Jim could have ever imagined. And the military, they were coming for him, too. "Keep running," the woman hissed, glancing over her shoulder, her face pale under the moonlight. "They'll be on us any second." Jim's chest burned as he forced himself to run faster. But his mind kept racing ahead of him. The alien bodies, the devices, the signal that had brought them here. "What do you mean, they've been waiting?" Jim gasped as they darted through the field toward a small stand of trees in the distance. Their only hope of cover. "You said they've been waiting for the signal. What does that mean? Why now?" She didn't answer right away, just kept moving, her steps swift and determined. "Tell me!" Jim shouted, desperate for clarity, his voice rising above the sound of their footsteps. "They've been monitoring us," she finally said, her voice tight, strained from the effort. "Not just since Roswell. They've been here long before that. The crash wasn't an accident. It was a message to them, a signal to activate the next phase of their plan." Jim's stomach twisted. Their plan? He could barely keep up. The man who had warned him in the beginning. The strange device that had been left for him. It was all starting to make sense in the worst possible way. "The aliens?" Jim asked, still breathless. "They've been controlling this whole thing?" "No," the woman said, glancing back at him. "Not all of them, but some. The ones we've seen, the ones who've been hidden. They're a faction. They've been waiting for the right moment to make their move. And the signal you've activated is what calls them to us. To Earth." Jim's heart skipped. "The signal? You mean the transmitter I found?" She nodded, pushing through the underbrush. "It's not just a simple device. It's a beacon, a call to their allies, their leaders." A freezing gust of wind whipped through the trees, rattling the leaves. Jim squinted through the shadows, trying to keep his focus. But there was something moving in the distance, something large and menacing, its silhouette shifting in the moonlight. "They're here," the woman said, her voice a mixture of dread and disbelief. The sound of the military boots, too loud and too close, forced Jim to push forward even harder, ignoring the burning pain in his lungs. But there was something else. A noise, a crackling like static on a radio. Then a voice, low, mechanical, almost otherworldly, boomed from the distance. "Sergeant Harper," the voice said, "you are in violation of direct orders. Surrender, immediately." Jim froze. His blood ran cold. That voice, he'd heard it before. It was the same voice that had spoken through the government agent at his house. It was them, the ones who had been watching him, the ones who had been monitoring his every move. And now they were closing in. But it wasn't just the military. The aliens, the creatures, had heard the signal, and they were coming for him. The woman stopped, her expression shifting. "It's not the government," she whispered urgently, looking toward the horizon. "They've been compromised. They're not working for us anymore. The factions that control the military, they've made a deal with them. What deal? Jim demanded. But the words felt hollow in his mouth as he turned his head toward the voice again. It was getting closer. The shape looming in the distance was moving rapidly toward them, its eyes glowing in the dark. The woman's face was hard as stone now, her features set with determination. It's all connected. They've been trying to weaponize the alien technology. They've been collaborating with them. The Roswell crash wasn't just an isolated incident. It was the start of something much bigger. And now it's out of control. The wind howled through the trees as Jim looked back toward the silhouette coming closer. There was no more time for questions, no more time for figuring this out. Whatever was happening, whatever had been triggered, was unfolding at lightning speed. The woman grabbed Jim's arm, pulling him toward a narrow trail that led deeper into the woods. We need to get to the extraction point. Now, if we don't, we won't make it out alive. Extraction point? Jim asked, confused. You think they'll just let us leave? The woman didn't look at him. Her eyes were locked on the horizon, where the shadowy figures were beginning to take shape. The military was closing in. The aliens, too. And the woman wasn't waiting for either. They're not just going to let us leave. We're going to have to make our stand. Jim's pulse quickened as they ran, the weight of her words crashing into him like a freight train. Make a stand? Against the government? Against aliens? It was impossible, but the static crackling through the air grew louder, and the faint sounds of alien communication became clearer. Jim could hear them now. Whispers, soft and guttural like 100 voices calling to him from the darkness. Suddenly, the woman pulled up short, turning on him with a fierce expression. You have to understand, Sergeant, what we're up against isn't just about the crash anymore. It's about everything. The technology, the species, the network they've built. Before Jim could ask what she meant, the night was shattered by a brilliant, blinding light from above and a deafening roar from the distance. The creatures had arrived, and the time for running was over. The light overhead was so blinding, it cut through the night like a blade, illuminating everything below in stark, harsh white. Jim's eyes burned as he squinted up, but he couldn't make sense of the shape hovering above them. It was too bright, too overwhelming. The wind whipped around him, pushing him to his knees as the sheer force of the craft above pulled the air from his lungs. The woman had already crouched low, her eyes focused on something in the distance where the silhouettes of soldiers, human soldiers, were rapidly closing in. But it wasn't them that Jim was concerned about anymore. The real danger was coming from above. The creatures, the ones that had followed the signal. They were here, they were real, and they were waiting. Get down! The woman shouted, her voice barely audible over the deafening roar of the ship. She grabbed Jim's arm and yanked him into the cover of the trees. The ground beneath them shook as the craft hovered, the very air vibrating with an energy that felt like it could tear the world apart. Every instinct told Jim to run, to hide, but his feet felt glued to the earth. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the lights. What were they? What did they want? Get it together, Sergeant. The woman's voice was sharp, filled with urgency. We don't have much time. You have to make a choice. Jim snapped his head toward her, still struggling to understand what was happening. What choice? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. His mind was still spinning. The creatures, the government, the transmitter, everything had collided into this one moment. The transmitter, the woman said, pulling the device from his pack and holding it out in front of him. You've been carrying it all this time. It's not just a beacon, Jim. It's a weapon. A weapon they can use to control us. Or worse, to enslave us. Jim's stomach twisted. A weapon? You've got to be kidding me. How does that... Listen, she cut him off, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and determination. The aliens who came to Roswell, they didn't just crash here by accident. It wasn't an exploratory mission. They were sent. And they weren't sent to study us. They were sent to prepare us for something much larger. The technology we've been uncovering, it's not just alien. It's a bridge, a portal to a greater network. And that portal is opening now. Jim's heart pounded in his chest. A portal? But to where? To who? Before he could ask, the ground beneath them trembled again. This time, the earth felt like it was cracking open beneath his feet. The military soldiers were too close now. They were almost on top of them. But Jim couldn't look away from the craft above. There was something alive in it. The ship wasn't just a machine. It was a being. A vessel carrying something far more dangerous than he could comprehend. "They're coming," the woman said softly, almost to herself. "The others. The ones that control them." Jim's chest tightened. "What are you talking about?" "Think bigger, Jim," she replied, her eyes wide with a mix of terror and determination. "These aren't just isolated creatures. These are part of a network, a galactic empire, and they've been watching us. They've been studying us for decades. And now that the signal has activated, there's no going back. Earth is no longer just a home for humans. We're a resource. We're a conquest." The words hit Jim like a punch to the gut. The creatures, the military, the signals, the cover-ups. It had all been a carefully orchestrated plan. Earth wasn't just a battlefield for alien technology. It was a battleground for something far more terrifying. "But why? Why now?" Jim asked, desperation creeping into his voice. He couldn't wrap his head around it. What had triggered this? Why had they waited so long? The woman's face hardened. "They waited for the right moment, Jim. They've been waiting for us to get smart, for us to become advanced enough to understand their technology. The crash at Roswell was just the beginning. They planted the seeds. We planted the seeds. The government has been playing along, trying to control the technology. And now we've given them what they need." The ship above hummed louder, the lights intensifying, as if it could hear her words. The air around them grew thick, dense with an energy that felt almost too powerful to comprehend. The military forces were closing in, but they were no longer the priority. The priority was what was coming from above. Jim's eyes flicked to the transmitter in her hand. The beacon, the weapon, it felt as though it was vibrating in her grip, as if it were alive, hungry for something. Jim didn't understand how or why, but he felt the weight of its power like a heavy burden, a decision, his decision. The woman shoved the transmitter into his hands. "It's time. Jim, you've carried it this far. You're the one who can stop this. You're the one who can decide what happens next." Jim's mind spun, the reality of the moment crashing down on him like a ton of bricks. Was he ready to make this choice? To wield something so powerful, so dangerous, he couldn't possibly know the consequences? Before he could answer, a voice, not human, spoke directly into his mind. "Sergeant Harper," it said, echoing inside his skull, chilling him to the bone. "Oh, we have been waiting for you." He recoiled, clutching his head as the alien presence flooded his thoughts. The voice was cold, impersonal, yet unmistakably familiar. It was them, the ones who had sent the creatures, the ones behind the signal. "You will not stop us," the voice continued. "You will be the catalyst. Join us, and Earth will thrive." A flash of light exploded before his eyes, and Jim staggered backward, barely able to keep his balance. The military soldiers were almost there. The woman, her face pale and determined, was pulling him toward the transmitter once more. The ship overhead began to descend, the hum becoming almost unbearable. "Make your choice," the voice said again, and Jim knew. He knew that this was the moment where everything would change. The military forces were too close now. The choice had to be made. No more running. No more secrets. Jim took a deep breath. His hand closed around the transmitter. With a single desperate motion, he pressed the button. The world around him exploded.